Daisy, what has the reaction been so far? Are we all just in a sort of state of shock, actually, because this is our head of state ultimately?
I think there obviously is a lot of alarm because people have already been coming to terms with the fact that the Queen hasn't been very well over the last few months, has missed a number of very important high-profile engagements. You'll remember, Darren, COP26 was one, Remembrance Service in November was another. And the palace was slightly caught during that time because it didn't appear to be telling us the whole truth about the monarch's state of health, assuring us that she hadn't been to hospital when it turned out she had been to hospital and so on. So I think there is also a bit today of people saying, well, at least they are keeping us informed. And as you all know, anybody who watches the royal family knows that there is this balance, particularly when it comes to the head of state, of how much do they tell us of her private medical details, how much do they feel we should be allowed to know, and how much reassurance do they want to give? Because, of course, there is an issue of trust. Do we trust what we hear Buckingham Palace is telling us? So I think they've tried to be on the front foot on this. Last week, when Prince Charles and then his wife Camilla both tested positive, they were quick to tell us then, but they weren't so keen on telling us whether the Queen was taking, for instance, daily tests, whether she was doing lateral flows every day, whether those results were coming back negative. Now we know she has tested positive, although again, reassuring signs coming out in this statement that we got just a short time ago, saying she's only experiencing currently low-level symptoms like a cold.
Yeah, and a lot of people are asking the question here. Obviously, the monarch turns 96 in April. Was it inevitable, actually, that the Queen was going to catch a highly transmissible variant, if it is indeed, of course, the Omicron variant, which has been infecting most of the country, hasn't it, Daisy, at this present moment?
I don't think anybody felt it was inevitable because we're told that every precaution was being taken. Of course, it wasn't. She hasn't been living as she was during the height of the pandemic before she was triple vaccinated, as we know she is now. In those days, I don't know if you remember, she was at Windsor Castle. She was in what was nicknamed HMS Bubble with her husband, Prince Philip, and just about 20 members of staff looking after her, carrying on doing her red boxes and her duties. Since then, of course, she has been seeing more people, and she did have some audiences in the real world rather than on Zoom in the last week. The timing, we know that Prince Charles saw her the Tuesday before last and then contracted or got his positive test 2 days later. So that was really when people were most nervous, thinking, did he pass it on to his mother, as he obviously did do to Camilla? And I think people had subsequently thought, well, we're over that gestation period, so fingers crossed she's got away with it. She hasn't got COVID. Then, of course, the news broke today. There's nothing to say that she won't continue just getting low-level symptoms of a common cold. But having had some health problems over the last few months and knowing, she is, as you said, 95 going on 96, the pictures we saw of her just a few days ago, she did actually say to her guests, I can't walk. She was leaning quite heavily onto her cane. So for a 95-year-old, she's in very good health. But, of course, she is 95 and she is frail.
I mean, ultimately, Daisy, honestly, the monarch is in better nick than I am. But, she was saying, you're right, she pointed to these mobility problems. She actually pointed at her leg with that walking stick and said, well, as you can see, I can't move. So there does seem to... a lot of people are looking at the Queen now at almost the age of 96 and thinking, well, the older the monarch gets, the more people get worried about this sort of story. Even as you say, it might be mild symptoms. And, of course, the Queen saying, in that true British spirit, I'm going to get on with light duties.
Yes, and she will want to be seen. One of the Queen's mottos is to be seen is to be believed. And what she means by that is if she's going to be trusted, if people are going to look up to her and give her the respect that the royal family wants her to get, they have to see her performing her duties, see her out in the public. I mean, just a small thing, one of the reasons she always wears such bright clothes is to be seen, because of course she is diminutive, and she knows that when she's in the days when she was allowed to be out in very large crowds, people wanted to be able to say to their friends and family, I saw the Queen, which is why she's always in these very garish colours and so on. So it's very important to the Queen and the whole of the royal family that they are seen out and about, not seen to be hiding away. And we know that during lockdown, during the height of the epidemic, that she found it very frustrating that she wasn't being able to do what she's normally able to do, being out and about, fulfilling her responsibilities and duties. And of course, we'll now have to see how much Prince Charles and Prince William will have to step in doing more of her roles. I know you were talking to Robert Jobson, a fantastic royal commentator himself, who was urging the Queen to take it easy. And I think all of us have sympathy with that. But we also know that won't be her instinct. Her instinct will be to try to brush this off as fast as possible and get back to the job in hand, whilst listening to her doctors. Of course, she has, the royal family has their private doctors, by royal assent. At Windsor, she's got her private GP, who's known as the apothecary of Windsor Castle. She is surrounded by medics. But of course, presumably she's now contagious. So they are all going to have to be very, very careful being around the Queen, who will obviously have to be in some form of isolation whilst being looked after. So it is going to be a very tricky few days ahead, lots of concern. And of course, she's not just a much-loved member of the royal family. As you said, she is the head of state and she has responsibilities. When new legislation comes in, she must give it royal assent. If she's not able to do that, then her son and grandson, Prince Charles and Prince William, will have to do that on her behalf. So she's not just a titular head of state, she's a working head of state with many duties to fulfil.
I mean, you could say that again. You know, the Queen works every single day, right? This is a monarch that never stops. But Daisy, just very briefly, we are so much further on in what we know about this virus and how we respond to this virus with antivirals and all of the rest of it. So we're in a much better position now than we would have been at the start of the pandemic 2 years ago, right?
Of course, but also there is a political element to this story. You know, I've been on the radio this morning talking about the fact that Boris Johnson is going to be announcing his so-called, as he would call it, Freedom Day tomorrow, that by the end of this week, he wants all restrictions, COVID restrictions, to be lifted. Now, what does this do to that policy? Because, of course, although 95-year-old woman gets COVID, has had triple jabbed, perhaps wouldn't make a big difference to public policy, to political policy, it just might make people think, is this really wise at the moment? The latest YouGov poll about lifting these restrictions, specifically the restriction, the mandated restriction that if you have a COVID positive result, you have to self-isolate for 5 days. That policy being lifted is actually not very popular with the public. Now, you and I could argue and disagree and could talk about that till the cows come home, but the public is frightened. 75% in that recent poll said they don't want that policy to be lifted. Now you add in the Queen, the most high-profile woman or person in this country, succumbing to COVID, and it actually might affect public opinion even more. I think this is going to make life for the Conservative Party and Boris Johnson's announcement tomorrow slightly trickier.